So if you're like me, you've probably heard people say that, hey, overtime is not taxed anymore because of that bill Trump signed into law last year. But that's really not true. So today I want to break down exactly what the no tax on overtime rule is, how it really works, and does it really help us blue collar workers. So if you recall, in 2025, a new tax law was passed and signed under President Donald Trump as part of what he called the Big Beautiful Bill. Very controversial bill. I think it happened last summer. But one of the most talked about portions of that bill is what people today are now calling the no tax on overtime portion. But that's a little misleading. That phrase is a little misleading. So here's the key thing you need to understand about the portion of this big beautiful bill, and that's overtime is not completely tax free. So what the law actually does is allow eligible workers to deduct part of their overtime pay from their federal taxable income. And this happens when you file your taxes. So in April 15th, when you file your taxes, this is when you will see the overtime benefit, not on your pay stub. So this, of course, applies to overtime starting in 2025, and it's scheduled to go through 2028 unless it's extended, which who knows. So here's the big kicker, very disappointing kicker, but only the overtime premium qualifies, so not your full hourly rate. So you know how you get paid 1.5 times your hourly rate for overtime? Just that 0.5 portion is what's tax deductible. It's very disappointing, but still helpful. So if you make 30 bucks an hour and overtime pays you $45 an hour, your overtime premium, that 0.5 is $15, right? So that's the portion that may qualify for this federal tax deduction. So your base pay is still taxed as normal. You're still, taxed on that 30 bucks an hour, but that 15 is potentially federal tax free. So of course, with all tax laws, there are caps on this deduction. You can deduct up to $12,500 per year if you're a single filer, or double that, $25,000 if you're married filing jointly. And then of course, if you made $50,000 of overtime, you worked every day of the year, you can only write off, whatever those limits are for you. If you're married, that's 25 grand. The rest is taxed as normal income, no matter what. So who qualifies? This only applies to W-2 employees, so not contractors, not 1099 employees or contractors, I'm sorry. You can't make up a Schedule C business, unfortunately, and make up some crazy overtime numbers. This is only strictly for W-2 employees. So last year, 2025, we were just talking about this at work. Our W-2s didn't have overtime on it because this law got passed kind of late in the year, if you will. So in 2025, you have to figure this out yourself. You have to know how many hours of overtime you worked, your hourly rate, and programs like TurboTax really is super easy figuring that out if you know your hourly rate and overtime hours, right? So if you go to a CPA or an accountant for your taxes, just make sure they know the updated laws on this, and don't miss out on this deduction if you qualify. But going forward, it should be on your W-2s for 2026 and beyond. It should have a, hey, he made X amount of dollars in overtime. Should be clearly listed in a box on your W-2. And with caps and everything, with federal tax deductions, there's always income phase outs with this thing, just like the stimulus checks and all that. So if you make roughly 150 grand and you're single, starts phasing out, or $300,000 if you're married filing jointly, and that overtime federal tax benefit will start to phase out past those income limits. So this is the part where a lot of people get it wrong. Obviously, it's not all tax-free, right? Just the 0.5, but also you still pay Social Security tax on that money that you earn. You still pay Medicare tax and state income tax if you live in a state with state income tax. If you're in Florida or I think Tennessee, you're good. So your paycheck, like I said, doesn't magically grow overnight just because this bill went into law. The benefit, again, shows up when you file your taxes, April 15th or before, or if you file an extension, you're going to see it when you file your taxes, not necessarily on your paycheck every other Friday. So let's look at a couple of real world examples. So let's say you worked a ton of overtime in 2025 and had 10 grand qualifying overtime premium pay here. So if you're in a 22% tax bracket, which is what, like 180 limit or something like that, that $10,000 of overtime deduction will reduce your liability, your tax liability, by $2,200. So essentially, you save $2,200, which is pretty sweet. That's real money right there. So even though this bill isn't perfect, like we hoped, right? It does, you can't write off 100% of your time and half pay. It does help people working long hours. It rewards overtime instead of penalizing it. You don't go into work that overtime shift and it's like, man, I got to pay more taxes on this. No, at least it helps you out and it's real dollars. And for us blue collar workers like plant workers, refinery workers, nurses, well, not teachers, their salary, but this really adds up. I mean, we just had that $10,000 of overtime example, saved that person $2,200. That's real money. And a lot of people during this high inflation time, everything's super expensive. Man, that adds up quick, especially if you have a family to support. So that's real money. That's impressive. That's putting money in the middle class pockets. It's not favoring the rich, and it's not just handouts. That's money for people like me and you, to help provide for our families, and man, that's awesome. It really does help middle class workers, which is huge. So no, overtime is not completely tax free, but yes, part of it can lower your federal tax bill, like we looked at, and that's huge. If you work overtime, track it carefully. Know your hours, know your hourly wage rate, which I know you already do that, and make sure your tax software is up to date. Like I said, TurboTax is good. That's the only one I looked at, and make sure your accountant or CPA, if you use one of those, make sure they know what's up and are aware of this new bill. Anyway, that was my quick little video on no tax on overtime, which is not what we originally wanted, but it's still pretty good. But I appreciate you watching the video, and I'll see you next week.